Hi guys, my name is Dylan Hale and I am the illustrator for Winston's Words of Wisdom. And I'm also a teacher in Bentonville schools. I teach at the high school. I also teach for the virtual program for grades 7 through 12. And I teach art, of course. But today what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to draw Winston. So here we go. All right, so the first step to drawing Winston is kind of giving ourselves some basic shapes to work within. And I actually have a copy of the book right here. That way we kind of have a reference image so you can see where we're going to end up, right? So we're going to start with this larger shape that is his head. And his head, it's kind of a rectangle. And I'm going to do this really, really lightly, kind of letting things be a little bit messy. Anytime we're drawing, we're always going to want to start out messy, right? So his head is roughly this shape. And then his muzzle as well, it's kind of an oval. So I'm going to move my hand in an oval motion and then slowly let my pencil down. I'm just going to keep making ovals. Now, because I'm doing this super light, this is eventually going to get erased. And I'm going to put a line down the middle here. That way I can keep things kind of symmetrical because he is a pretty symmetrical looking guy. Make that just a bit darker. And then with his nose is actually triangular and it's going to go right in the middle of our entire oval. So right about here. And his nose is triangular, it kind of bulges out. And later we'll round out these corners and everything. Okay, so we've got his nose, we've got his muzzle, we've got his head. I'm going to go up top and we're going to add his ears. So his ears are really, really large, right? And they're like a couple of triangles. So they start right just shy of the middle and they curve outward, but then they also connect back down to the corner of his head. So they connect down to that corner of that rectangle that we drew first, right? And so then his eyes, they are ovals, they're upright ovals, and they're tilted out a little bit from the center. So just like I did here, I'm going to move my hand in that oval motion, kind of getting a feel for where these need to go. And I think I'm going to go back and make his nose just a little bit larger, just a smidge. All right, so there we've got the basis for Winston. Now we just need to go in and kind of add a few things that are going to separate some of these features for us. So at the bottom of his nose, we're going to separate his muzzle for his mouth. And that's just a curved line outward. You could even do a half circle if you wanted. Either way works. I'll erase that. And then inside of this kind of half circle here, I'm going to do another half circle. And that's where his chin is and his mouth is going to go. So I'm actually going to add two. That way we have the chin and then the inside of his mouth. Right? So we have the basic features for Winston. Now all we have to do is go back and kind of solidify them and clean them up. So I'm going to start with his muzzle. I'm going to go out just right around his eye. And you notice I'm doing this one a little bit darker. So now we did all of our searching lines, these light, super sketchy lines. Now we're going back and darkening them up. And so then right here with his muzzle, all that hair, kind of doing almost like a zigzag in a way. And I'll add a few lines that curve upward towards his nose. And then we'll go in and we'll do his nose. So around these corners, I'm going to let that be really rounded. Really rounded and soft. And I'll erase on the inside there because I don't need that anymore. And I'm going to do the same thing with his eyes. And I'm turning my paper. That way it's easier for me to draw. Now, what we're going to do is inside his muzzle here, we're going to add another little line that almost connects to these other two. Not quite, though. And at the top of his nose, I'm going to draw another thin line. This is going to be the highlight that he has. And on his eyes, towards the right side of each oval, I'm just going to draw a line just inside of it. Okay, so when we color this in, these will be the spaces for his highlights. Okay. For the sides of his head, it's kind of this back and forth motion similar to what we did here. Don't think about it too much. Winston's a shaggy dog, a Scottish Terrier. Maybe a few extra lines there. I'll go back and add a few extra with his muzzle. So notice that the hairs with his muzzle, they're always going to kind of curve up towards his nose, or sometimes even above his nose. And with his mouth, we'll move down to there. Just a little zigzag for the bottom, and another zigzag. And then on the inside, we're going to do a letter M for his tongue. And in the middle, we're going to bring that straight down. And so now we've got a tongue inside of a mouth. Now, let's move on up to his ears and the top of his head. So, we're going to outline those ears. And they curve outward ever so slightly. And then on the inside, starting at the top of the ear, just inside each one, we're going to add another line. And that's going to create the fold. So now we have an inside of his ear and the outside of his ear. And with those, I like doing just a little zigzag. Maybe a few hairs at the top. But those zigzags, those kind of help make him look a little extra fuzzy. And then in the middle, some extra hairs. And with those hairs, I'm doing like a letter M, a letter N, sometimes a V or a triangle. There's really no right or wrong way to make Winston kind of fuzzy. Now, the part that makes Winston are his eyebrows. He's got really expressive eyebrows. And I usually have them up, and I'm going to give us a line here to kind of follow, just like a little half circle. I'm going to do a zigzag for like an actual eyebrow. And then with his eyebrow hairs, those are going to start in the inside of his eyebrows, and they're going to go off of his face. And I do a mixture of like 5 long ones, 3 to 4 short ones, just kind of whatever feels right. The idea here is to make it look like he's got really bushy eyebrows. So now that we have Winston drawn, let's go fill him in a little bit. Let's color in his eyes. There's one. And the other one. And if you want, you could color a little bit of the top and bottom of that crescent shape that we made. Oh, and I forgot one thing. We need to add some lines right underneath his eyes. It's these little details that matter. So now down to his nose. Let's fill in that nose. And then what we're going to do is we're going to split this highlight. I'm actually going to do a little bit on top. That way it's super thin and narrow. All right, we've got his nose. Now we can fill in his mouth. Now, here's the thing. With Winston, because he's got black fur, it's really hard to kind of separate between his eyes and his fur, right? Because his eyes are filled in with black, So nose is filled in with black. So usually what I end up doing is I'm doing more of kind of like a gray. He's not really black. So I'm using the side of my pencil here. Turning my paper for however I need to move my hand, whatever makes it easier. If we want, we can go a little bit darker on the sides. Get his ears up here. I'm going to leave the inside of his ears alone. That way they look kind of pink, a little bit lighter on the inside. Get his chin down here. And his tongue a little bit, because it's on the inside of his mouth, so it's going to seem a little bit darker. And there we have it. That's how we draw Winston. Now, if we wanted to add his collar, we're just going to add a curved line below his chin and muzzle area. And then we're going to add another. And we may fill in that space a little bit with kind of a scribbly line. But then all we have to do is a circle with a W. And then at the top of each of these letters, or each part of this letter, and the bottom, I just add a little extra line. And there we have it. That's how we draw Winston.